Okay, so today I am going to share my purchasing project. And so the first book I chose was Don't Laugh at Me by Steve Susskind. And this book is about kids who are bullied or made fun of because they wore glasses or because they were too short or too tall or too skinny or, all those things. And I think it is something that you can use in a lot of grade levels, which is one of the reasons I chose to include it. But it is a great example of showing why it's okay to have differences. And I think you can adapt it to really any grade and really any lesson plan. And I think it's a point that we always have to drive home. And I think it's one of those books that we always have to use beginning of the school year and then maybe again at like the middle of the school year when we start to have some issues after they're all tired of being around each other. So I chose this book because it teaches a lesson that is very important to learn, but it has a very simple plot line, so they don't really have to follow a whole lot. The second book I chose was When Sophie Gets Angry, Really, Really Angry by Molly Bang. And I chose this book because we need to be able to teach kids what to do when their emotions get the best of them. And so this book is about a young girl named Sophie, and she runs away from home when she gets angry. But she comes back and she's usually pretty calm, and then she can talk it out. And I think this is another one that we use with younger children, but also, if you're teaching middle schoolers, they start to go through puberty changes. And so I think it is something that, once again, we can adapt to a lot of grade levels. And so we can talk about different ways to handle our anger. It builds up social personality development. It's another good way to implement classroom rules. And then this idea I found on Pinterest was actually just like a poster. And it was introducing how to talk about what to do when we're angry and what to do with our feelings. The next book I chose was All My Stripes by Shayna Rudolph and Danielle Royer. And I chose this book because I believe it's important to teach kids to feel confident about themselves at a young age. And so this book is about a young boy named Zane, and he's a zebra and he has autism. And it talks about the daily challenges he faces, as far as like what he faces with sensory or from feel or sound or not being able to communicate how he is feeling. And he just feels different. And he feels like people only see the autism. They don't see who he really is. And so this book, basically his mom tells him like, hey, like, but you have all these great stripes. So you have your pilot stripe, which leads us home, and your honesty stripe, so you tell us truth and curiosity and all these things. And for this, I think it is really important to have the kids recognize what is great about themselves. And I think this is, again, another one that you could get away with for quite a few years in different age groups. And so I would give each kid their own zebra, and they would write their name on it and color all the stripes to represent 4, 6, whatever amount I decide, things about them. And then I would probably hang them up on like a class bulletin board, because I think it's really important to recognize the diversity between all my students, because students are like snowflakes. They're all unique. So I think that is what I would do with that book, and I think that's why it's so important. The next one would be The Three Little Cajun Pigs by Mark Artell, and it is written in a Southern dialect, and it teaches about the geographic region of the South just in general. And it is the same premise as The Three Little Pigs and the Big Bad Wolf, but I would use this to begin to start introducing compare and contrasting. So I think when you start to introduce that topic, you have to do something that's familiar to everybody. And I can read The Three Little Pigs, but they're not going to have to think about it a lot. Everybody knows the story of The Three Little Pigs, and so they're going to be more focused on abstracting it with or contrasting it with The Three Little Cajun Pigs. And so I think this is one of those ones, and I have quite a few in here that are good like starter books for that. And so I think that is really important. But I think we can also focus on literary elements, so like character maps, plot maps, that kind of thing. And I also think if I'm teaching about the southern region of the United States or different states in the southern region, I think this is awesome because it does begin to teach a little bit about those southern states. The next one I chose was Pink and Stay by Patricia Polacco. And I chose quite a few books by her. I liked every book I read by her. So this book is about a colored boy and a white boy, and they are caught between the crossfire of the Union and the Confederates during the Civil War. And Stay is the white boy, and Pink is the colored boy. And Stay gets injured, and so Pink brings him to his mom, and his mom takes care of him. But Pink's mom won't let them go back, and so the boys get back to health and everything, and then she is killed on the front porch because they think that she's harboring soldiers, and she is, but she refuses to let them in, and so they kill her right there on the front porch. The boys run away but are caught by the Confederate Army and placed in the Andersonville camp. And Stay lives to tell the story, and that's the point of view that the story is from. But Pink, because he was colored, was hung shortly after his capture. I chose this book because it teaches about a historical moment, but it also teaches that sometimes doing the right thing isn't always the most convenient, but we do it anyway. I would probably use this as one of my introductory lesson plans into a Civil War unit. This book really struck a chord with me, and my fourth grade teacher read it to me, and that's actually who gave it to me to use for this project. And I didn't remember it resonating with me that much as a fourth grader, but I think it's really important. And so I'd have them write a small research paper, and I'd have them learn about the war, and I'd have them write about a deeper understanding of why Stay and Pink's relationship was dangerous, because it was. But I'd also roll that into, sometimes we have to do what's not convenient, but it's right. And my goal is to be able to teach in a Catholic school. And so to be able to teach a lesson like this is very important to me. And then Enemy Pie by Derek Mutson. And this is about a little boy who thinks this is going to be the best summer he's ever had in his life. And his enemy, Jeremy, moves into his neighborhood. And the little boy does not get invited to any of Jeremy's parties or anything, and so he feels very left out, and he hates Jeremy. And one day his dad suggests, hey, why don't you I'll make an enemy pie, but you have to spend the whole day with him, otherwise the enemy pie doesn't work. And the little boys spend the whole day together, and the little boy finds out that he actually really likes Jeremy, and then it turns out just to be, I think it's like a boysenberry pie or an apple pie. It turns out to be just like a regular pie. And for classroom use, I would have the students write down on a little slip of paper one item they would put in an enemy pie and collect them. And then after reading the book and discussing how the protagonists of the book change throughout, and how we should handle people we do not like, we would eat an actual pie. But the point of having the kids give me those slips of paper is, what do you think is important to put into a relationship? And so we'll talk about the different things that go into creating a successful relationship with other people. And so I chose this book because it teaches that people are not always what they seem, and we have to give people chances. I chose Thunder Cake by Patricia Polacco. And in this book, one little girl is so afraid of thunderstorms that she thinks she can hide from it. But her grandmother is tough love and isn't having it. And so she tells her that she has to come out in front of the bed, and that they will make a thunder cake, but they have to go outside where the thunder is. And the grandma gives the little girl a way to judge how far away the thunder is, and like how long they have to collect the rest of the ingredients. And after the cake is in the oven, the grandma shows the little girl why she is so brave and why it's silly to be scared of a noise that can't hurt you. I chose this because many kids are afraid of thunderstorms, and this book will show them that thunder cannot hurt them, but it does really use onomatopoeias really well. And so that I would use this book to introduce onomatopoeias. And then I would have the students pick their favorite scene and add more substance to it, more words, or more characterization. So they're not super well-developed characters. I mean, they're good for the story, but if I'm teaching characterization and what makes a good character, I would want my students to be able to make a more well-rounded character. Ira Sleeps Over by Bernard Weber. And Ira decides to stay at his friend's Reggie house. And Ira is not sure if he should take his teddy bear, and his sister makes him feel really insecure about it, so he decides to leave him at home. He has hours of fun with Reggie, and at bedtime, Reggie pulls out his own teddy bear. Ira then goes home and gets his own teddy bear. And I chose this book because I believe it will help my students realize they all have more in common than they think they do. And for the classroom use, in a little notebook or even just like on a piece of paper, I would have the children take 5 minutes to write something they do not do or carry with them or anything like that, because they're afraid others will judge them. And I, as their teacher, would read these, and then I would kind of use it to my advantage when I do like partnering and stuff, and kind of hopefully help make some more friendships. Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. I chose this book because it is perspective on World War II, but it also shows again how sometimes what is the rules and what is right have not always lined up in history. And I budgeted for a class set, so I budgeted for 30 of these books. They are $5.59 a piece. I believe I found them on Amazon. So I was treating these as a class set. In this novel, a young girl named Ellen Rosen is taken in by her friend Anne Marie because her parents are taken with the Nazis, because Ellen Rosen is a Jew. And Anne Marie's family tries to alter her to look like Anne Marie's older sister so that she can live through the Holocaust. And then both of these sets of parents show their kids that family is more important than anything. And so first, I would have a worksheet with questions for each chapter to check for understanding, because I believe that's really important when you read a novel as a class, and especially since like this will kind of be one of the first ones they read. Like, I think that's important. And then I think it really opens a door into talking about the hardships of the Jews and other things, and why people didn't think these camps were bad. Like, people thought that they got to have picnics and like it was like this great thing, and it wasn't, but that's what was being advertised. So we would talk about like propaganda. And then I wouldn't discuss World War II too much, only because the focus of the book is the Holocaust and like the Nazi camps. Or concentration camps. So I would not focus so much on the World War II aspect as the concentration camps. I would use a different book for World War II. And then when I read this book in school, my teacher did a game called Nazis versus Jews. And so I take my class outside and play it. So half the group pretends to be the Nazis, half the group pretends to be the Jews, and the Jews have to try to make it past the Nazis. And so it was a lot of fun. And so I think it kind of drives home that point, and it's a good kinesthetic activity. The Lorax by Dr. Seuss. And I chose this book because it teaches the importance of the plants and trees around us and the cost we pay for industry. So in the Lorax, the story is told about a man who came in and made a factory and cut down one tree. And the Lorax popped up and said, "Hey, can you like not cut down my tree, because like that's my home?" And the guy said, "I have to." And then soon enough, one tree was enough, and so he began chopping down 4 at once till they were all gone. And then soon all his family left, for there was no work, and his factory soon shut down because there was no more trees for him to chop down. And now there were no trees and no Lorax and not anyone really, because there was no trees. And then he gives the last tree seed to a young man, tells him to grow a new forest so that the Lorax might come back. And so for classroom use, I would use this to teach the importance of trees in our environment and like what costs we do pay for industry, and then why we should not be so greedy with the land that we have. Like, all we have is all we have, and so why we should be preserving it. Fly Away Home by Eve Bunting. A little boy and his father are homeless, so they live in the airport because it was warm and safe, but they have to be super careful because if they're caught, they could be kicked out. There's another little family that lives in the airport too, and the little boy's father knows that the little boy has to start going to school, but he just can't afford to send him. Sometimes the little boy becomes frustrated, thinking they will never again have a home, but he remembers that one day there was a bird that got trapped in the airport, and he soon made it out. And so I chose this book because while there is a fun activity, I also believe it teaches that nothing lasts forever. The pain, the suffering, the difficult days or weeks, they end, and they too fly away. And so this activity is It's inferences and like background knowledge. And so I would use this activity. There we go. I would use this activity so I would use it to create, to start discussing inferences and foreshadowing and that kind of thing. And I think since it's a pretty simple storyline, it won't overwhelm them too much. And then I chose Knots on a Counting Rope by Bill Martin. And in this book, a grandfather tells his grandson the night of his birth, even though they both know the boy already knows it by heart. And then as we read on, we learn the boy is actually blind. And the grandfather is teaching him to look within himself for strength because the grandfather won't always be there. And every time he tells the story, they tie a knot in a rope. They never really explain why, other than the boy will remember the story. So I assume it is so that every time he remembers the feels of the beats, he remembers his grandfather, but it also is like a sequencing. And so he knows when to touch a new knot on the rope. And then for this one, I would keep it pretty simple. I would just have the children, I would have all the children have their grandparents tell them a story about when they were little. And then I'll have them write about it and share it with the class. The next one is Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters by John Steptoe. And a man has two beautiful daughters, Manyara and Nyasha. And Manyara is always cruel to her sister, telling her how one day she will be queen and Nyasha will have to serve her household. And then one day they set off for the king's household, and Nyasha gives everything to these three people she sees on her travels. But Manyara does not. And when Nyasha gets to the castle, she sees the king in all his glory and becomes the queen. And then for this interactive brochure, I'll just pull it up, it's easier. So it talks about the character and the setting. It's like a guess the missing word activity, and then where the settings of the story, characters, and then how did the characters respond to each other in different events, and then compare and contrast. And then this is comparing texts, and then write a paragraph contrasting the two sisters. And so I thought that was really inventive and cool. And then my next book is also by Patricia Polacco because she's basically my new favorite. And this one is Junkyard Wonders. And so a girl has moved to a new school, and she's put in the SPED classroom. And her class is called the Junkyard because everybody believes it's the rejects. But their teacher takes them on this great adventure into a junkyard and tells them to pick out things, and then they need to build something new out of it. And then this young girl's group made a model airplane, and they wanted to add a motor to send it to the moon. Unfortunately, halfway through the book, one of the boys dies because his body grew too fast and his heart couldn't keep up, and so they learn about death. And he wanted their project to be named Junkyard Wonders, and in his honor, when they launched it, that is what they called it. This is based on a true story, and at the end, it talks about how Gibby, a boy she knew, he now works for NASA. And on Apollo 11, he stowed a picture of the class, the Junkyard Wonders, because he wanted to send them all to the moon. And so I would have the students using materials they found around the house or outside, create something new out of junk. And then, why did you build this? And if you can make it a real thing, what would it do and what purpose would it serve? And so showing that everything has some sort of beauty. And then Story of Christmas by Mary Packard. So going back to the whole I want to teach in a Catholic school thing, this was a pop-up nativity book. And so I really loved this. And it tells every single day is a cute little book. And so it tells you the story of Jesus. And so then in every day in religion class, we would pull the book out, and the student number that corresponds with the book that day, they would read out loud to the class. Thank You, Mr. Fokker by Patricia Polacco. And then this book is about a girl named Trisha, and she loves books, but everybody has always read to her. And when it is her turn to read, she stumbles through the words, and the other kids aren't very nice because she has dyslexia. And Mr. Fokker changes her whole life because he does not allow her to be bullied, and she fights really hard and works every day after school so she can read like everybody else. And when one boy continues to bully her, Mr. Fokker defends her from him as well. And then this chart is just a breakdown of major events in the story. And it makes them cite their reasoning and their source. So, like, it makes them go back in the book and actually, like, support their idea. And then El Deafo by C.C. Bell. This book is written like a comic strip, so it's pretty cool. Cece is deaf because of a case of meningitis, and she does receive hearing aids, but she doesn't really like them. She is placed in a SPED classroom with other kids like her, and so she learns how to communicate. She battles friendships, and, you know, people think she's dumb and everything, so she struggles a lot to find friends. And she created El Deafo as a coping mechanism, which I think is really awesome. And then she makes a real friendship with a girl named Martha, who treats her just the same as everybody else. And she even works up to the courage to talk to her crush. So I would have the students draw their own comic strip about something real about themselves, because we all have something weird. The next one is The Word That Saved My Life by Kimberly Bradley. And this book is about a girl named Ada during World War II. She has a cleft foot, and her mother is ashamed of her. And so she spent most of her life locked up in their apartment. And when they get evacuation orders, Ada knows that she has to leave everything with her brother. And so she taught herself, Ada her whole life taught herself how to walk in preparation for one day being able to flee. And so she grabbed her brother and she fled to another town. And they were taken to a lady named Susan Smith, and she gives them bath, clean clothes, and even took Ada to a doctor. Ada grew and blossomed and even began to help with the injured soldiers in the war. Ada's mother tries to take them back, but Ada confronts her and gets her and Jamie, who's her brother, out of there. But there's a bomb, and they find Susan going through the rubble trying to find them. And so this is kind of just like a check for understanding review. And so I think they're good questions that really help drive the point of the story home, which is inner strength, and that sometimes it's not always convenient. Like, we still have to do it, and that family isn't always blood. And there's a lot of kids out there who their family isn't their blood for whatever reason, and I think it's important to remind them that, like, hey, that's okay because you have somebody that loves you. And then the next one was Celebrate America, illustrated by Terry Pastor. And it's a pop-up, pull-ups book, and I did post a video about it, and it's full of the information about the United States. And I would have the kids pick one thing in the book to research. For the next one, The Jolly Postman by Janet Alberg. This book is different storybook characters: Cinderella, the witches, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and they're writing and receiving letters back and forth, and they're all delivered by the same postman, so, like, he gets to see all the reactions, and it's kind of cute. And then I'd have all the students read the letter in the book, and then I would have them create a flyer or write a letter to their favorite fairy tale character. So, like, the witch receives a flyer about different broomsticks. So something like that. And I think it's a good way to introduce letter writing or stuff like that in younger ages. Laura's Little House by Laura Ingalls Wilder. This is a really condensed book of the real Little House on the Prairie book, Little House on the Prairie. And so basically it's a pop-up book, it's a move book, and you meet all the members of Laura's families and what their roles are in the house. And then there are little critical thinking questions throughout the book, and so I would put all those into a worksheet and have the students write down their answers when they look through each flap, teaching them how to make inferences. The Best of Times by Greg Tang. This book is filled with rhyming words as well as practice problems in every page of the book, and it helps explain multiplication in, like, an easier way. And I would have all the students practice the challenge problems on the bottom of the page. Like, if you flip it upside down, there's a challenge problem. And then Mystery Math by David A. Adler. And this book teaches all sorts of different algebraic equations and how to solve them. And it includes the actual, like, photos and the actual, like, movement of things in the photos to make the problems make sense. And so I would probably just use this to introduce algebraic questions and then kind of fill it in with the worksheet that kind of goes along with what we're using that day. I think it's really good for visual learners. The Little Red Cat Who Ran Away by Patrick McDonnell. This is about a little red cat that runs away, and he ended up losing his alphabet because he was being chased by all sorts of different animals. And I would have, so this book is completely white except for the characters that have color. And so I'd actually have the students create a setting based on a letter. So like the setting would have to start with the letter. So like if you had S, it could be in the sky. It could be in a swamp. You know, it could be wherever. It is one of my favorites, but for older kids, it incorporates the alphabet with a storyline. And since there's no real setting, I would use it to teach setting. This would be kind of like a beginning of the unit thing. And then S is for Sunflower by Devin Sicilin. This book uses the alphabet to describe all sorts of different places and things to have to do with Kansas. And so I'd assign a letter to each student and have them research one of the things listed on the page, and so they can tell us about it so we learn about the history of Kansas. Sleeping Bobby by Will and Mary Pope Osborne and Giselle Potter. And so this book is a different take on the fairy tale Sleeping Beauty. And so it's actually Sleeping Bobby. That's really that's the biggest difference. And this is one of the other books I would use for comparing and contrasting because everybody knows the story of Sleeping Beauty, and so it'd be pretty easy. And then Henny Penny by Mage Tovey and Marin Roos. And Henny Penny is in her backyard when an acorn falls in her head, and she runs around the whole town telling everybody the sky's falling. And so I would use this to teach why we shouldn't gossip and why we need to have all the facts before we talk about something. Gone with the Wind by Margie Palatini and Brian Ajar. And so in this book, a fairy godmother has lost all of her powers and she just doesn't know what to do. And so she goes on a mission with the Tooth Fairy and finds out that a lot of kids don't get tucked in at bed at night. And so she decides that will be her new job. And so I'd introduce this as a short project of what do you want to be when you grow up. And I would have the kids create probably a poster board or a brochure. I haven't decided. Madeline by Ludwig Bemelmans. And this book is about a girl who's part of a pack who is raised by nuns because they're orphans. And Madeline keeps everybody in line and feeling comfortable, but when she becomes sick and needs her appendix out, it really bothers the girls. They think they also need their appendixes out, and they're very worried about Madeline, and it's a thing. And so this lesson plan is simply just, I would use the character web out of this lesson plan, but there's quite a few things rolled in, but I think that's probably the best one. Goodnight Moon by Margaret Wise Brown. This book is a child telling everybody and everything around him goodnight before he goes to sleep. And I would have the kids make their own book following the layout of the original book and make them include the color variations, complete sentences, rhyming words, which is really good with my older kids to teach different arts. And then Leo the Late Bloomer by Robert Krause. And then the story is about a tiger who doesn't mature as fast as the tigers around him. But eventually he does. And that's pretty awesome. And so this Leo the Late Bloomer activity is simply just a self-reflection activity about why it's okay that we don't all grow at the same time. The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. This book is about how we take from those around us, or how we give everything of ourselves trying to make other people happy, and how there's only so much of us to give. And so I chose this book because I love it. It made me really emotional. But I feel like we really live in a taking society. So we take and take, but what do we give? And so I'd have the children draw their own giving tree and write down what they have to give to others. And then this would be great to display in the hallway and show what my class can give to others around them. And then maybe like make them pull tabs. And so when they do that for somebody, they can pull their tab off. And then Press Here by Hervé Tollet. And so this is an interactive book, and so on each page there's a paint dot, and you just follow the instructions, but it shows you how colors mix. And so I would give all the students the different colors, and I'd have them follow the directions in the book as we read and have them mix so they can learn how different colors can be made, and then I would have them make hypotheses and observations, so it'd be really cool, kind of like science experiment. Cindy Ellen by Susan Lowell and Jane Manning. This story is about a young girl who lives in the Wild West, and she gets a new stepmother and a stepsister, and she doesn't like them at all because they make her do all the chores. And so the TPT pack that I included has a Venn diagram and makes the students learn about the authors as well. And then The Irish Cinder Lad by Shirley Climo and Loretta Krupinski. And this book is about a young boy who gains a stepmom and 3 stepsisters, and he's forced to work with animals outside all day. And they make him really scared to work outside because they tell him there's a bull that will attack him. So he sleeps in the tree where he's safe. And one day when the bull shows up, he decides to try to take him on, and the bull actually ends up taking care of the boy. The bull eventually dies, but the boy is instructed to take his tail for protection. And the tail, actually, he finds the princess by using the tail. But it takes the princess a year to find the Irish Cinder Lad. And so this TPT pack that I included is a trifold. And it just talks about different characterization, setting, plot, all that. But it's easy to pull out later as a resource. The next one is The Golden Sandal by Rebecca Hickox and William Hillenbrand. And this story is about a young girl who begs her father to marry the woman who looks after her. And when she does, the jealousy from her new mom erupts because her new daughter is not as good, or her daughter is not as good as her stepdaughter, or at least she feels that way. And so they basically treat her as the outcast and like she's awful. And a red fish appears to her one night when she gets in trouble and grants her all these wishes. And because she was good, and she loses her sandal on the way home, and the prince wants to find her. The mom tries to sabotage the wedding, but she tries to make her hair fall out, but she makes her hair even more beautiful. Then the prince's brother goes after Maha's sister, and the mom uses the same remedy on her as Maha, since it made Maha beautiful, and it ends up making her ugly, and the prince does not marry her. And then for classroom use, I would have the children make their own comic strip of their own version of Cinderella, and then compare and contrast all 3 versions, the original, the Golden Sandal, and then their version. The next one is Henry's Freedom Box by Ellen Levine. And this book talks about a young man named Henry who's a slave. When his master dies, he's ripped away from his family, or he's ripped away from his mom to a new master, meets his wife, Nancy, and then they have kids, but his master sells his wife and kids off to a different master, and he has no idea what to do, but a white man who's against slavery helps Henry mail himself in a box all the way to Pennsylvania, where he is free. I would roll this into geography and have them do little small projects, probably on a poster board, like where Henry went and a little fact about each little path that he could have taken. There was a lot of ways he could have gone to Pennsylvania. And then Steal Away Home by Lois Ruby. And then this book is written in past and present, and a family is remodeling their home when they find a skeleton. And after much investigating, it's determined that the corpse belongs to Miss Elizabeth Charles. And she was a slave trying to make it to freedom, but she died right there in the house. And then Dana, who's the present-day girl, finds a black journal written by Miss Elizabeth Charles, as we later find out, and learns all about the struggles back then that happened. And this book was set in Lawrence, Kansas, so I would use little context questions like, was Kansas a slave state? Yes or no? If so, when did Kansas become a free soiler state? My next one is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. And this is about a young girl named Margaret who's forced to leave her home in New York, and she has to move to the suburbs of New Jersey. She meets Nancy Wheeler. They become best friends. Nancy introduced Margaret to Janie and Gretchen, and then the 4 girls start the 4 preteen sensation secret club, where they talk about bras, periods, and boys, and various other things. And then Margaret's parents do not enforce any religion on her, but she secretly talks to God. And then for school, Margaret does a year-long project over religion and attends various churches and services. And by the end of the book, she decides that parents should tell their kids what religions they are, so they don't have to figure it out. And since the story is based in Farbrook, New Jersey, I would have students create their own biographies for Margaret, where she lived, where she went to school, and about her life. And then they would also have to explain how where she lived affected the plot of the story, because if she lived in New York, I mean, she probably would have matured faster, or maybe not. Like, they just have to explain that. And then Helpers in My Community by Bobby Kalman. This book just breaks down all different jobs in your community and why they're important. It's very simple. I made a kindergarten lesson plan with it. And so I would have coloring sheets, and the students could color any profession they wanted. And then we will make anchor charts that we can hang up in our room about community characteristics, since our classroom is a community. And so I think that's really cool. And then my next book is Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing by Judy Blume. And this is a book about a young boy named Peter who has many issues with his brother Fudge. And Peter does not understand why Fudge ruins everything and why his parents so discipline him. And at the end of the book, Fudge eats Peter's turtle dribble and kills him, and Peter is furious. His parents get him a puppy because Fudge cannot eat that. These lesson ideas, so having students research about turtles, and the math one was they could create their own lesson plans, or their own word problems for math, which I thought was kind of cool. I mean, students might understand math concepts better if they get to introduce it to themselves in a way that makes sense. And then the Hershey's Fraction book by Jerry Pilato. And so I want this book so bad, and I want to do my lesson plan because I loved my lesson plan. And so this book introduces fractions using a big Hershey's bar. And I would give each of my students a Hershey bar, and then I would have them break it up like the book does and kind of like move them around on like a tray. And then they can physically see and move the Hershey pieces. And so I think that'd be a really good way to like introduce fractions. The Mixed Up Chameleon by Eric Carle. And then this is about a chameleon learning all the different colors he can be depending on where he is. If he's on the giraffe, if he's on the elephants. So I would have the students create a collage combining two different animals. To teach about collage, it'd be a really easy way to kind of introduce it. So probably an opening lesson. And then Solids, Liquids, and Gases by Julie Murray. And this book talks about liquids, gases, and their properties, and what makes something a liquid, a gas, or a solid. And so I would use this book to start a science experiment about how the state they are affects their weight. And so students would get like frozen water, frozen chocolate chips, non-frozen chocolate chips, room temperature water, and like how does their state affect their mass? So in all, I used $723.53 of my $1,000 budget. And then I would just hold on to the remaining money to continue to buy books for my classroom as it grows, because it will continue to grow and I still need a budget. So that is my purchasing project.